Hello, beautiful souls. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. My name is Carolyn, and this channel is all about true crime, mystery, and anything abnormal. Highly recommend subscribing because this channel is definitely a vibe. So today's story is horrible, absolutely horrible. It's, I would say, probably the worst confession I've ever heard, as in the details and the description of what happened to the victims. So just be warned before we get into the story that it's going to go into a lot of detail and it's pretty gruesome. Today's story takes place in Hong Kong, but it doesn't start in Hong Kong. It starts in London, England. Graham and Helen Jutting were a very happy couple. They were very in love and they lived just outside London. Helen ran a milkshake shop and Graham was an engineer. In 1985, a year after the couple had got married, they welcomed their first child, Rurik Jutting. Graham and Helen spoiled Rurik, to put it mildly. Rurik's mother, Helen, she was a bit over the top. She would constantly tell Rurik how amazing, how special he was. And in most situations, this is the way parents would want to raise their child. So their child grows up having a good self-esteem and thinking well about themselves. The problem was the way that Helen went about it was not that Rurik was this absolutely amazing child. It was Rurik was an exceptional child above all other children. So she was telling him from birth that he was the most spectacular kid in the entire world. He was the smartest kid in the world. He was the most amazing kid in the world. And obviously lots of parents think that about their own children. But with Helen, it really kind of went, it seems, overboard. And it actually ends up really negatively affecting Rurik. So this was not a case of a mother trying to instill confidence in her son. She was instilling in Rurik that he was better than everybody else. And Rurik really had an overwhelming sense of self-importance. During his early years in school, Rurik had a really hard time. Now, he didn't have any problems learning. He was very intelligent. But he had a really hard time interacting with his peers because he thought he was better than all of them. Teachers would often describe him as eccentric and having trouble fitting in with his peers. As Rurik entered his teen years, he attended Winchester College, which was a very prestigious private school. But when Rurik showed up to school, he was really disappointed, and the school did not meet his expectations. Basically, to this kid, nothing was ever good enough. To attend this school, Rurik had got a scholarship. And to most kids, if you got a scholarship to a really prestigious school, you would be extremely excited about that. No, Rurik, he was pissed off. He was pissed off because he was chosen sixth. So I guess the school, when they're going to give scholarships, I guess they choose in order. I didn't know that students would be able to find out, well, we picked this first and you're second and you're whatever. But anyway, somehow he knew he was picked sixth. So to him, the scholarship didn't really mean much because he wasn't first. He thought that the school was somehow not capable of seeing how absolutely spectacular he was. And guess what? The rest of the world, they couldn't see how spectacular he was because he wasn't. And it's not to say that he wasn't an intelligent child. He was extremely intelligent. He did very well when it came to schoolwork, but he was either first or he was mad. And he actually got upset with his mother when she found out that he had got the scholarship to this private school. Because obviously parents, if their child gets into this really prestigious private school. They're going to be really excited. He's going to get this great education. But no, Rurik was pissed off at his mom because he thought she was too surprised that he got the scholarship. So his reaction that he wanted from his mother was for him to say, I got the scholarship, and his mother to be like, obviously you did. And he was upset with her reaction because he expected that his exceptional nature was a given and that it wouldn't surprise her that he would get this scholarship. And she probably wasn't surprised. She was probably just really happy for her son. But Rurik has a messed up head, and it gets so dark, but we're not quite there yet. At 16, Rurik went through a really traumatic experience. He witnessed his father attempting to unalive himself by cutting, I can't say it on YouTube, and Rurik is actually the one who got his dad in the car and rushed him to the hospital. His dad ended up being okay, but this traumatic event really took a toll on Rurik. 2 years later, Rurik confided to his psychiatrist that he was having similar thoughts of doing the same thing to himself. When the psychiatrist inquired what was causing him to feel this way, he disclosed to the psychologist that he had been SA'd by a boy at school, and this was obviously something that was very traumatic, and he had never told anyone else about it. And it doesn't come up again. There is no other information about what happened to him, but this is what he told his psychiatrist. He also said that he had overheard his parents discussing divorce, and that was leading him to have a lot of really kind of dark, and he just wasn't happy. Despite the challenges that he faced, Rurik showed exceptional perseverance. He graduated high school and he was admitted to Peterhouse College, which is part of Cambridge University, and he planned to study law and history. Rurik really excelled in his history courses, and he graduated with first-class honors in history, which really spoke to how intelligent he really was. However, when Rurik learned that for law, he had received second-class honors, which was still a really big deal, and most people would have been extremely ecstatic, he was so angry. Rurik's narcissistic personality that was nurtured by a life of privilege made him incapable of accepting any criticism and anything less than perfection. He was the type of person that had to be the smartest person in the room. And attending university, he was not the smartest person in the room. And to most people, they don't want to be the smartest person in the room. I don't want to be the smartest person in the room because how am I going to learn anything from anyone? If I'm always the smartest, what do I learn? So to him, he had to be the smartest person in the room. He wasn't, and it just, in his mind, he couldn't handle it. Following graduation, Rurik got a really good job at Barclay Bank, which is in Canary Wharf, which is a very prominent financial district in London. However, it didn't take long for Rurik's talent to catch the eye of the Bank of America Merrill Lynch. They could recognize his ambition and his potential, and they wanted him. The tempting offer presented to him, he could not turn down, and he took the position. Rurik took the job with Merrill Lynch, and he was given the responsibility of developing intricate tax products for the firm. I don't know what that means, but that's what happened. The position also came with a very high salary of almost £300,000 per year. Rurik's romantic life, as you can imagine, didn't go well. While working at Barclays Bank, he fell in love with a colleague named Sarah Butts. However, shortly after they started dating, Sarah was actually transferred for a 1-year term to New York City. So Sarah went to New York. The two kind of had a long distance relationship. But a year later, when Sarah came back, she broke the news to Rurik that she wanted to break up with him and she had fallen in love with someone else. Because of Rurik's extremely fragile ego, he was furious with Sarah. It got to the point that Sarah was so afraid of Rurik, she actually moved back to New York City to get away from him. So this is where we start seeing things getting dark. And boy, do they go downhill very quickly. At this time, Rurik started experimenting with substances and hiring workers. I can't say it, so I'm just going to use ladies of the night. I also can't say the substance he used, so I'm going to call it Pepsi, if you know what I mean. And he just kept consuming more and more and more Pepsi. And what this did was it fueled this crazy sexual obsession that he had. And he was an extremely, extremely sadistic man. By the time he was 24, all of his sexual desires had turned violent. He fantasized about R-wording, torturing, and kidnapping. Another thing that Rurik started to do was all of the ladies of the night, if they were going to have sex, they would make him wear a condom. What he started doing is removing the condom without the woman's knowledge or permission to do so. Now, in England, it's not illegal to pay for sexual services. However, someone removing a condom without the consent of the partner is considered R-wording in England, which it should be. And it wasn't that he didn't get caught doing this. The workers, they would know that he had done this, but they didn't really feel like in their position they could go to the police and the police would believe them. And this is one thing that just drives me crazy. I've talked about it in other videos. How police can look at a lady of the night and say, we cannot believe her. But the person who is willing to hire and pay money for her, we can believe him. Anyways, you've probably heard me ramble about that in another video, I'll be honest, because it drives me crazy. You have two people who are virtually doing the same thing. One's the customer, one's the buyer. But why is it always that the worker is the person we can't believe? Cops just cannot possibly believe. And that's why they continue to be victims, because people who want to take someone else's life, they know if they choose someone in that profession, police are very unlikely to investigate or care in even the slightest. And scene. Okay, rant over. Let's get back to the story. In 2012, auditors began investigating at Bank of America Merrill Lynch concerning potential regulatory violations related to their tax activities in Luxembourg, which was the division that Rurik worked in. The executives within the company perceived Rurik's conduct and negligent approach to work as a significant risk to the organization's reputation. To address the ongoing investigation and to not terminate Rurik, they transferred him to Hong Kong in 2013. Rurik became the vice president and head of structured equity finance in Hong Kong. Rurik had spiraled downward before his transfer to Hong Kong. He was very depressed. He would cry While he was at work, he would snort Pepsi constantly, and he would have to drink an entire bottle of vodka every night to be able to fall asleep. His dependency on Pepsi became so extreme that when he was flying from London to Hong Kong, he filled a balloon with Pepsi and shoved it up his butt so that he could smuggle it to Hong Kong. His addiction was so strong that it wasn't a possibility for him in his mind to fly to Hong Kong to find somewhere to buy it. He needed to make sure he had it constantly at this point. Rurik settled in Hong Kong in an absolutely gorgeous development. Rurik viewed his move to Hong Kong as a step down in his career, and this just increased his erratic behavior. The amount of substances he was using would have made him erratic to begin with, and it started coming out a lot at work, and his new managers didn't know what to do with him. They found him so erratic. They didn't know what to do with him. He was just completely out of control, and they didn't know how to deal with his crazy behavior. Several of them said that he was the most challenging employee that they had ever dealt with in their career. Rurik embraced his new surroundings and started going out, socializing, and spending time with beautiful women. He fell in love with a woman who goes by the name Yanni. From the outside, their relationship looked happy and they looked like they were very passionate. But the truth was, Rurik was just escalating and escalating. All he was interested in was going to drug-fueled orgies. Eventually, Yanni just couldn't take it anymore and she broke up with him. After the breakup, Rurik started isolating himself and he would have no social interaction that was not required. His days at work were really long. He was working 16 hours a day. All he would do is go to work. When he was out of work, all he wanted to do was to do substances and hire ladies of the night. He spent the majority of his time alone, high, and playing video games. His disturbed mental state just kept declining. By 2014, his addiction to Pepsi was absolutely, completely out of control. At one point, he had a really important business meeting in London that he was supposed to attend, but he would go on these binges of using substances, and he ended up missing the meeting. And the reason he gives is just so bizarre. You would think if you missed an important work meeting, you would say, maybe I had the flu, I had a family member that wasn't well. I don't know. What you wouldn't probably say is that you missed the meeting because you just found out you have HIV. Because he didn't have it. And it's a very, very strange excuse to miss a meeting. By mid-October in 2014, again, his behavior is just becoming more and more erratic, and these substance binges that he would go on just became longer and longer. And at this point, he had missed 2 weeks out of work. And all he would do is stay in his apartment, do substances, and he would watch a lot of very violent sexual videos. Corn? Then Rurik decided maybe he would try having sex with men. Maybe that would satisfy his need. So he downloads the app Grindr and he starts hooking up with a bunch of guys, but none of it fulfilled this empty, insatiable feeling he had. He could not fill this deep, I don't know what it was, sick. But his experiences with men just left him feeling unsatisfied because it was the same thing when he would have sex with women. It didn't make any difference. Nothing satisfied him. So then Rurik decided, I'm going to do exactly what I have always wanted to do. And he believed that will fill the void I feel. Rurik then went out and met Sumarti Ningsih. And I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. She actually went by the name Alice, so I'm not going to have to destroy her name anymore, and my apologies. I know I'm not pronouncing that correctly. Alice was only 19 years old. She had just arrived in Hong Kong from Indonesia, where she grew up, and she was very desperate for money. And Rurik saw this as the perfect opportunity. He had money, and he thought that Alice would make perfect prey. With the promise of money, Alice agreed to go with Rurik back to his apartment. What she didn't know was she was going to become a victim for Rurik to act out all of his sick sexual obsessions. During the assault, Alice begged him to let her go, and he just ignored her pleas. Another day, Rurik was actually able to lure Alice back to his apartment. This time, he was offering a very large amount of money, and he promised Alice that nothing that was non-consensual would happen. Alice, being desperate, she agreed, and she went back to Rurik's apartment. Alice walked into that apartment without the slightest idea of the horror that was about to occur. Rurik would use pliers, sex toys, and his fists to subdue Alice. The torture continued for 2 days, and the entire time Rurik was doing a lot of Pepsi, and he was also videotaping a lot of what was occurring on his cell phone. On the 3rd day, Rurik dragged Alice into the bathroom. He put her in front of the toilet and told her to lick the toilet until it was clean. This man is so sick. He then took out a large knife and sliced her neck. He then moved her body into the bathtub, and he continued to cut her until she was almost decapitated. Rurik then filmed himself confessing to what he had done and going into extreme detail as to everything that he did against her. He then stuffed her body into a suitcase and put the suitcase on his balcony. On October 31st, he went to a hardware store and he bought sandpaper, nails, and a blowtorch. And at first when I was researching this and I heard that he had gone to the hardware store to buy all of these things, I was assuming that he was going to use these things to somehow dispose of Alice's body. But that was not his intention for buying these things. The reason he bought these things is because he felt he needed more objects to be able to torture his next victim with. That night, an unsuspecting Jessie Lorena, I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, she, unknowing what she was actually showing up for, she ended up meeting Rurik at a bar. Jessie was an Indonesian immigrant who had been living in Hong Kong for the last 8 years. Jessie worked as a DJ in the red light district, so Rurik convinces her to come back to his apartment. The minute that she enters his apartment, she knows something is wrong. She can feel her intuition is telling her something isn't right here, and there was an absolutely horrific smell. The last text message that Jessie would ever send was to a close friend of hers, and she texted saying, "Something smells really bad, and I really want to get out of here." She would never be heard from again. Jessie suddenly felt terrified and she screamed. At this point, Rurik took a knife and held it to her throat and told her that he would cut her if she screamed again. But Jessie was not going to go down without a fight. She started screaming and fighting as hard as she could. Unfortunately, Rurik was able to overpower her, and he ended up cutting her on her neck, the same that he had done with Alice, the previous victim, who, by the way, is still on the balcony in the suitcase. Rurik now had 2 dead bodies in his apartment, and he had no idea what he was going to do to get rid of them. He didn't even really seem to have a mind of a plan as to what he was going to do next. He then made an odd choice. He decided to call into work to his phone to change his voice message. And I'm going to read to you what he changed it to. I'm going to read it because it's really unhinged and I want to get it exactly. So he is at home. He calls into work, goes into his voicemail, and he's going to re-record the outgoing message that anyone who calls him at Merrill Lynch, this is the message that anyone would hear. It says, "I'm out of the office indefinitely. For urgent inquiries, or indeed any inquiries, please contact someone who is not an insane psychopath. For escalation, please contact God, though I suspect the devil will have custody." That last line only really worked if I had followed through. And the last part referred to, at some point, he considered unaliving himself as a way to get out of this, because he also he would do all of these video recordings of himself talking about what he had did. And one thing that he had talked about was he was really afraid of going to a Hong Kong prison. And I'm glad that he's afraid to go to a Hong Kong prison, because that's where he ends up. So just before 5 a.m., Rurik himself called 999, which would be if you were trying to call emergency services in Hong Kong. He calls and he said, "I did something bad," and then he hangs up. And then he calls back and he's asking them to hurry up. When the police arrived, as soon as they entered the apartment, they could see in the living room, and Jessie's naked body was laying on the living room floor, surrounded by a pool of her blood. Near her body was a 12-inch knife, a blood-covered sex toy, and a whole bunch of little baggies of Pepsi. Rurik was completely covered in blood, and he wasn't really even acknowledging the police officers. He was kind of off in a corner and he was talking to himself, and he wasn't really making any sense, and he wouldn't really engage with the police, or it almost seemed as though he wasn't quite aware that they were there. This was somebody who was on a lot of substances, and he's also just committed these horrific acts. So yeah, he's probably not in a great state of mind. Police then hear a gurgling sound come from Jessie's body. So she was still alive. So they get her as quickly as possible into an ambulance. They're taking her to the hospital, but unfortunately, she died on the way to the hospital. As the police are then investigating the crime scene, they end up finding Alice's body in the suitcase on the balcony. Rurik's confession to the police absolutely horrified them. He told them that he wished that he had kept her alive longer so that he could have tortured her more before she died. And I really think in his confessions to police, I think he was really getting off on going into the detail and probably seeing police, and police are probably trying not to react to what he's saying, but I'm just going to read a small piece of this. And if you don't want to hear anything too graphic, just fast forward like 15 seconds, because this is how disgusting this man is. So this is a direct quote from Rurik while he is in the interrogation room with police. "I've never seen anyone that scared. She voluntarily ate feces out of the toilet and then smiled at me afterward. I urinated into her mouth. She threw up and I made her eat her own vomit. I made her take drugs. I beat her vagina, I can't say the word, P word, so badly that she bled from her labia." So I think that everyone can be happy that he didn't keep either of them alive longer to torture them, because that's the sickest shit I've ever heard. So the evidence was overwhelming. Rurik, he confessed immediately that he had killed both of them. And he, as you just see in his interrogation, he is just admitting to absolutely everything that he had done. There were also a lot of videos on his cell phone. As I had mentioned earlier, he had videotaped some of what he had done to the women, but there were also videos of him just talking to the camera about what he had done. And in the video, I didn't see the video, thank God, but in the video, apparently you can see the girl is dead, like her dead body is laying in the background of the video. So there was never a question of whether or not he did it. He confessed right away, and there was no way that he could come up with, "I'm not guilty." He tries, because he admitted guilt, but he pled not guilty based on diminished responsibility. The judge had him examined by 4 psychiatrists, and all 4 of the psychiatrists came back and said that he had narcissistic personality, which I think we could already gather. He also had a lot of sexual deviant kind of dysfunctions, but he knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew what he was doing was wrong. So he wasn't any diminished responsibility. He fully intended to do this. He did exactly what he wanted to do, and he was afraid that he was going to have to go to a Hong Kong prison. Now, I don't know anything about Hong Kong prisons. Let me know, because I don't know. I don't know what is Hong Kong prison worse? I really don't know. The jury came back quite quickly and found him guilty, and he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences, and he will be serving those 2 consecutive life sentences in a Hong Kong prison. So that is the story of Rurik Jutting and his absolutely twisted, demented mind. I just want to say a huge thank you if you have been here and watched the whole video. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you have not, and please comment and tell me what you think of this story. Yeah, if you would like to support the channel, please stick around and watch another video, and I will see you in the next one.